The thing that frightens people about being followed is the idea of a stranger behind them in the dark. But that isn't what any of tonight's 6 people would tell you. Every one of them will tell you the same thing, and it's much worse. That by the time they understood what was happening, the other person already knew their week, knew which night they worked late, which door they used, how long they took to lock it, and which of their habits was the one worth waiting for. You cannot be hunted by somebody who doesn't know your pattern, and you hand your pattern to the world for free every single day without ever once being asked for it. Welcome to the 3 a.m. protocol. 6 true stories tonight, and one of them was sent in by one of you. Doors locked. Let's begin. Nadia was 26 and had exactly the life that a stalker's story needs, which is to say a perfectly ordinary one. A job at a marketing firm downtown, a flat in a converted building 19 minutes from the office, and a habit of taking a rideshare home on the 2 or 3 nights a week. She stayed past 9 because the walk to the station meant a long stretch of underpass, and she'd decided years earlier that £8 was a fair price for not doing that in the dark. She used the app the way everybody does, without thought, the way you use a lift. And the first time she got the same driver twice in 1 week, she noticed it only because he remembered a detail from the previous ride, and she found that pleasant. A man in his 40s, soft-spoken, clean car, an air freshener shaped like a pine tree. He asked how the pitch had gone. She'd mentioned a pitch. It was nice, she thought, that somebody had listened. The second week, she got him 3 times, and the nice feeling turned into a small mathematical itch, because she knew, the way everybody vaguely knows, that these apps assign you whoever is nearest, out of hundreds of drivers in a city that size, and that getting the same one 3 times in 5 days was the kind of coincidence that ought to be rare. She mentioned it to a friend who laughed and said, maybe he just works your area, and that explanation was good enough to carry her through another fortnight, during which she got him another 4 times, and during which he began to arrive faster, under 2 minutes, twice, which is a thing that only happens when a car is already close. And then on a Thursday in November, running late and irritable, she ordered a car from the office lobby before she'd finished packing up, and the app said 1 minute, and when she got outside, he was already there, engine off, in a loading bay across the road, in the dark, in a spot with a clear view of the lobby doors. He had not driven there in a minute. He had been sitting there. She canceled the ride from the pavement with her thumb shaking, walked back inside, and asked the night security man to stay with her while she waited for a taxi off the street. And she did all the correct things over the following week, which is the part of this I want to be fair about, because Nadia did not ignore it. She reported him through the app, and the app sent her a polite message saying they had investigated and taken appropriate action and that she would not be matched with that driver again. And for 11 days, she wasn't. On the 12th, she came out of the building at 10 past 9 to a different name on her screen, a different photograph, a different car, a Vauxhall instead of a Skoda, and the pine tree air freshener hanging from the mirror, and his voice saying good evening, and the doors already unlocked. He had simply made another account. It cost him nothing. It took him a fortnight. And it had never once in 3 months been random. What actually stopped it wasn't the app. Nadia got out at a set of traffic lights before her street, on a busy road with people around, and she went to the police. And it turned out to be one of those rare cases where being methodical works in the victim's favor, because a man who builds 2 accounts, leaves 2 paper trails. He had been a driver in that city for 6 years. He had no record. And in the interviews afterwards, what came out, what Nadia was told by a very careful officer in a very small room, was that he hadn't chosen her because of anything she'd done or worn or said, but because of a number. She had been, for a stretch of that autumn, the single most predictable regular fare on his stretch of the city. Same building, same 3 nights, same 20-minute window. 91% of the time. He had not been hunting her, he had been optimizing. And the sentence Nadia has never been able to shake, the one she repeated to me twice, was the officer explaining that the man had kept a note of her name on his phone with 2 words after it, in the flat way you'd label a shift or a route or a job that pays reliably, and the 2 words were easy pattern. If you just did the maths on your own week, which door, which nights, how long you take at the lock, then good. Keep doing it, because that arithmetic is the only thing on your side, and it's free. And while you're here, do me a favor. Subscribe and turn on the bell so the rest of tonight reaches you late in the dark with the lights low, which is exactly where these land hardest. Our first one was a man with an app and a spreadsheet. And there is a strange comfort in that, because a man can be arrested. This next one is about something that had worked out a young woman's week too, the same way, just as carefully. And that was already on the bus before she ever chose which stop to wait at. The 41 ran from the retail park on the eastern edge of that city into the center and out again the other side, and between 11 and half past midnight, it belonged almost entirely to people finishing shifts, cleaners, kitchen staff, the girls off the late till at the big supermarket, and Bethan, who was 19 and doing 4 nights a week, restocking, so she could stop asking her mother for money. She caught it from a different stop depending on how the night went. Sometimes the one right outside the loading doors, sometimes the 1-2 streets down by the roundabout if she'd stayed to help close, and once or twice, when the shift ran badly over a stop nearly a mile away on the ring road that the 41 only touched on the last run of the night. It mattered, that variation. It's the part she needed people to understand later, when she was trying to explain why it had frightened her so much. Because for 8 or 9 weeks, at every one of those different stops, on whichever night she got on and he was already there, always in the same seat, upstairs, 2nd row from the back, on the left, and next to the window. A man of about 50 in a dark waxed jacket, hands in his lap looking straight ahead down the aisle. Never asleep, never on a phone, never eating or reading, just sitting upright and facing forward the way people do when a bus is about to pull away. Except the bus had already been going for 20 minutes or 40, and he was always already there. At first she assumed he lived out past the retail park and rode the whole loop, which is a completely ordinary thing that completely ordinary people do. Then one night she got on at the far ring road stop, which is nearly the end of the route, and he was there. And the following week, she got on at the very first stop of the whole run, standing at the terminus in the drizzle while the driver was still doing his checks, and the bus was visibly, obviously empty. And she climbed the stairs, and he was in the 2nd row, from the back on the left, hands in his lap looking straight ahead. She started doing what any 19-year-old would do, which was tell people and get told back all the reasonable things. That she was tired, that there are a lot of men in dark jackets, that the buses swap over, and she was seeing 3 different drivers worth of passengers and stitching them into one. So she did the sensible modern thing and tried to photograph him, and this is the detail that made her mother stop laughing about it. She got 4 photographs on 4 different nights from the top of the stairs before she lost her nerve each time. In every single one of them, the seat is empty, not blurred, not obscured by a headrest, not a trick of the flash on the window. A clean, well-lit, perfectly ordinary photograph of an empty bus seat, second row, from the back, on the left, taken from 6 feet away, while she was looking directly at a man sitting in it. She did ask, eventually. That took her 3 weeks to work up to, and it went badly in a way she hadn't prepared for, because she'd braced herself for a driver who'd laugh at her, and instead, she got one who didn't. She waited until the bus was pulling out of the last stop before the depot, and she was the only one left downstairs, and she asked him, as lightly as she could manage, whether he ever went up top at the end of the run. He said no. She asked whether anybody did. He said the cleaners did it in the morning at the depot, and that he hadn't been up the stairs of a bus in 9 years. And when she said in a rush that there was a man up there who'd been on every single one of her nights, he did not turn around and he did not slow down, and after a while he said that if she was frightened, she should sit downstairs, behind him on the left, and that he'd not stop for anybody at the last 3 stops if she'd rather, which is a kind thing to offer a 19-year-old girl. It is also not the answer of a man who has never heard of the top deck of that bus. Bethan stopped taking the 41. She took the money for taxis out of her wages for the rest of that winter, and she told her mother it was because of a man on the bus, and she never said the rest of it out loud to anybody in her family, ever. Years later, working somewhere else entirely, she mentioned it to an older woman at that job who had driven buses in that city in the 90s, and the woman listened to the whole thing without interrupting and then asked her one question, which was whether he had been on the left or the right. Bethan said the left, and the woman told her that in 1994 on the Eastern Loop, a man had died on the top deck of a late bus, alone, sitting up, and had gone the whole route and back to the depot before anybody found him, because at that hour nobody goes upstairs and the driver has no reason to. She didn't know if it was the same seat. She said she'd never wanted to know, but she told Bethan the thing that Bethan has thought about every night since, which is that in all her years on that route, the only passengers who ever mentioned seeing anything up there were the ones who took the last run more than 3 nights a week, the regulars, never the one-offs, never the drunks or the tourists or the couples going home from town, only the people whose weeks it had had time to learn. This one was sent to us by a man named Errol, who told us he'd been sitting on it for 6 years and had never written it down before, and who asked us to change the name of the street and nothing else. These are his words. It started with a parcel of coffee filters, which is the most boring possible beginning to a story like this, and that's exactly why it took me so long to see it. I lived alone in the ground floor flat of a converted house. 4 flats, 1 shared front door, and a wooden shelf in the entrance hall where the postman left anything that wouldn't fit through the individual boxes. Everybody in that building had used that shelf for years without a single problem. And in the spring of that year, I noticed that a box I'd ordered had been opened. Not torn into, not damaged, but opened along the tape with something sharp and then pressed closed again, the way you'd do it if you wanted the thing to look untouched from a distance. Coffee filters. Nothing missing. I decided a courier had checked it for something and moved on with my life. Over the next 4 months, it happened 11 times. And I know it was 11 because I started keeping a list. And I want to be honest about how slowly the fear arrived, because I think that's the useful part of this for anybody listening. For the first 6, I was annoyed. Around the 7th, I got uneasy. Not because anything had been stolen, nothing ever was, not once, not a single item in 4 months, but because of what was being opened. It wasn't the parcels with obvious resale value. My headphones came through untouched. What got opened every time was the boring post. A bank statement twice. A letter from my dentist, a parcel from a pharmacy, a padded envelope from my mother with a birthday card in it, a delivery of the specific brand of protein powder I used, opened and resealed, nothing taken, and a letter confirming a hospital appointment, which was the one that made me sit down on the stairs, because I finally understood what all 11 had in common. None of them were worth money, all of them were worth information. I did what you're supposed to do, and it did not help at all. The police were kind and completely honest with me. Nothing had been stolen. Tampering with mail is very hard to prove without catching somebody at it. And there was no camera in that hallway. My landlord would not put one in. So I bought a cheap trail camera meant for photographing badgers, and I hid it in a carrier bag full of recycling on the floor of the hall, angled up at the shelf, and I left it there for 9 days. And on the 4th night, it took 41 photographs of the man from the top floor flat. A man I'd said good morning to perhaps 200 times, who had helped me carry a mattress up those exact stairs the year I moved in. Standing at that shelf at 2:20 in the morning in a dressing gown, with a craft knife and a roll of tape and my post, working through it unhurried, taking photographs of the contents with his phone and putting every single thing back. He was arrested, and it went to court, and he got a suspended sentence and a restraining order and moved out of the city. And I am told by people who know more about these things than I do that this was a good outcome. What I've never been able to make peace with is what was in the flat. Because it wasn't a shrine, and it wasn't threats, and there were no photographs of me sleeping or anything from a film. It was a folder. A cheap cardboard document folder, and inside it, in handwriting, on lined paper, was me. My bank, my dentist, my GP, the pharmacy I used, my mother's address in Wales, and her handwriting traced onto a separate sheet. The days I worked from home, the 2 evenings a week I was always out. The brand of everything I put in my body and where I bought it. 4 months of somebody assembling a man out of his boring post. He never once spoke to me strangely, and he never followed me anywhere. He didn't need to. He'd found a shelf in a hallway that told him everything, and the only reason I ever caught him is that he got greedy and opened the 11th one, and it happened to be the one that finally made me count. Errol. Errol's man came in through a shelf in a hallway, and I want to stay with that idea for one more story, because not everybody who takes your life apart has to come anywhere near your front door. Some of them do it entirely through other people, using the one thing every adult hands out on request to strangers, which is a list of the places they used to be. Priya. A different Priya, no relation to the care home, was 34 and between jobs, which in her industry meant 6 months of applications, and she had a document she'd been emailing out for years without ever thinking about it twice. A CV with the last 4 employers on it, and under that, the line every CV has, offering references on request. She sent it out perhaps 90 times that spring. And in June, she got a phone call from a woman she'd worked under at her second job 6 years earlier, who wanted to know in a slightly odd voice whether Priya was all right. The woman had been called 3 times over 5 weeks by a man doing reference checks. Very polite, very professional, knew Priya's dates of employment and her job title and the name of the project she'd worked on, and gave the name of a recruitment firm that the woman had assumed was real because why on earth wouldn't she? He'd asked the ordinary questions, and then he had asked some other ones. Whether Priya had ever had problems with attendance, and if so, what the reason had been. Whether she'd been living locally at the time, or commuting and from where. Whether she'd been in a relationship during those years, which the woman had declined to answer and which had bothered her enough afterwards that she'd mentioned it to her husband. And whether, this was the 3rd call, Priya still had the tattoo. Priya has a small tattoo on the inside of her left wrist. It is not on her CV. It is not on her professional profile. It is on her arm. She rang the other 3. 2 of them had also been called. Between them, over about 2 months, this man had reconstructed 9 years of her adult life out of 4 names on a document she had handed to 90 strangers. And the recruitment firm he'd given did not exist. And the number he'd called from was one of those internet numbers you can buy for a $5 and throw away. And the thing that made this particular kind of frightening, the specific flavor of it, which is different from the man in the loading bay and different from the man on the stairs with the craft knife, is that Priya never saw him. Not once. There was nobody outside her flat, and nobody behind her at the bus stop, and nothing pushed through her door. Somebody had been assembling her for 2 months with a phone and a polite voice, entirely out of the memories of people who loved her. And every single one of those people had helped him because he'd asked in a professional tone, and there is nothing in any of us that is trained to refuse that. She did try to find him, and I think the way she went about it is worth telling because it is the closest thing tonight has to somebody turning around and walking back towards the thing. She applied to the company that didn't exist a second time in October from a new email address under a name that wasn't hers, with a CV she'd written from scratch for a woman who had never lived. Different city, different degree, 4 employers she'd invented, and a mobile number belonging to a cheap handset she'd bought for cash. She wanted to know whether the advert was fishing for anybody or fishing for her. Nobody answered it. The advert stayed up for 11 more days and then came down, and the website went with it about a fortnight later. And the serviced mailbox company told her, quite reasonably, that they couldn't discuss their clients with a member of the public. So she has, in the end, exactly 1 piece of evidence about the man who spent 2 months building her. And it isn't the tattoo and it isn't the recruitment firm, it's the timing, because the advert came down 4 days after the second of her old managers rang to say she'd been called. 4 days after Priya started warning people, which means he was still watching something of hers in real time in the autumn after he'd stopped making calls. And she's never worked out what. She never found out who he was. She reported it to the police, who told her honestly that no crime they could name had been committed, and to the 2 job sites she'd been using, who thanked her for the feedback. She changed her CV to remove the employer names and lost about 1/3 of her callbacks as a result. And she moved flats at the end of that year for reasons she describes as unrelated, and then admits, if you push her a little, were not entirely unrelated. And she told me the part she thinks about, which isn't the tattoo, although the tattoo is the bit that makes everybody else go quiet. It's that when she went back through her sent emails to work out who could possibly have had all 4 names at once, the answer was 91 companies, some of which she could not remember applying to, 3 of which had job listings that were no longer online, and one of which, when she finally tried to look it up properly in the autumn, had never existed at all. A company with a website, a logo, an office address that turned out to be a serviced mailbox, and a single job advert for a single role that had been perfectly, precisely, unnervingly well suited to her. The first 4 people tonight were found because they were reachable through an app, a hallway, a phone. The next 2 were not found at all. The next 2 moved, deliberately and at expense, to places specifically chosen for being difficult to reach. And I want you to hold that in your head, because Marguerite and her husband bought that farmhouse precisely so that nothing could come near them without being seen coming. They were in their 50s. Both of them retired early, and the property was a stone house at the end of a 300-metre gravel drive with open fields on every side and a single gate at the road. And the reason they chose it over 4 others was the sight lines. You could see everything. That was the whole point of the place. The previous owner was an elderly man who had inherited it from his own parents and who was, the estate agent said, keen to move somewhere with neighbors. He left behind a garage full of tools and a great deal of goodwill, and taped to the inside of the door of the fuse cupboard, on an index card, gone yellow at the edges, in fountain pen, a short note that Marguerite found in their 2nd week and assumed was about a dog. It said, "Do not go down to the gate after dark. It only wants to be looked at." She showed it to her husband, and they laughed about it, and they kept it there. And it stayed on that door for the entire time they lived in that house, which was 4 years and 2 months. It began in the September, about 6 weeks after they moved in. Marguerite was washing up at the kitchen window, which looked straight down the length of the drive to the gate, and there was somebody standing at it. Not on the road, inside the gate, on the gravel, perhaps 2 meters in, facing the house. Too far to make out a face, close enough to see the shape of a person upright still. Her husband went out with a torch, and it was not there when he got halfway, and they made all the ordinary assumptions about, walkers and lost tourists and lads from the village. And then it happened again 11 days later, and then it settled into a rhythm. And the rhythm is the reason this story is in tonight's 6. It came between 15 and 20 minutes after full dark, whatever time full dark happened to be that month. Never earlier, never later. And it did nothing at all except stand inside the gate, facing the house, for somewhere between 4 and 9 minutes, and then not be there. Marguerite went to see the old man in the 2nd year. She'd got his new address from the solicitor on the pretext of a question about the septic tank, and she drove 40 minutes to a bungalow in a village with a bus stop and a shop and houses on both sides. And she sat in his front room with a cup of tea and asked him straight out about the card in the fuse cupboard. And he was not embarrassed. and he did not pretend not to remember writing it, which she said was the worst part of the whole visit. He asked her what time it came. She told him 15 or 20 minutes after dark. He nodded like a man having a diagnosis confirmed and said that was right, that it had been the same for his mother and the same for him, and that it had never once in 60 years come up the drive. Not 1 meter past where she'd seen it. And then he told her the 2 rules his mother had given him as a boy, which he'd shortened onto that index card because he hadn't known who'd be buying the house. The first was don't go down to it. The second was don't stop looking at it. He said his mother had believed, and he had come round to believing, that the standing was not a threat but a transaction, that it wanted to be seen, that being seen was the whole of what it wanted, and that in 60 years of that family giving it 4 to 9 minutes of attention a night from a lit kitchen window, it had never asked for anything else. Marguerite asked him what happened if you didn't look. He said he tried that once in 1974 for a fortnight. Curtains shut, back of the house, television on, and then he changed the subject and offered her a biscuit and wouldn't go back to it no matter how she tried. And she drove the 40 minutes home in the dark and was at the kitchen window that night at exactly the right time, and every night after. They tried everything a reasonable couple with money tries. Motion lights, which it never triggered. A camera on the gatepost, which recorded 4 years of foxes and delivery vans, and not one single frame of anything standing, where both of them, on more than 100 separate evenings, watched something stand. They called the police twice in the first year and stopped after the second time. They had the drive graveled more thickly so that anything walking it would be audible from the house, and you could hear a cat on that gravel. And they never once heard footsteps, coming or going. Her husband went down to it exactly 1 time in the 3rd year, out of temper rather than courage, walking the full 300 meters in the dark with a torch and shouting. And Marguerite watched the whole thing from the kitchen window, and what she saw was her husband walk right up to the gate and stand there and shout at nothing. And what he came back and told her, very quietly, with his hands shaking so badly he couldn't get the door chain on, was that when he was about 40 meters away, it had turned its head to keep looking at him, and that at 10 meters it was still there, and that he had walked the last 10 meters anyway, and it had not gone away as he arrived. It had simply, at some point he could not identify, stopped being something he could see, while still being something he could feel looking at him. They sold the house the following spring to a young family. Marguerite took the index card off the fuse cupboard door before the viewings, and then, on the last morning, taped it back. I've saved this one for last because it's mine, and because, unlike the other 5, it has no ending, no arrest, no folder in a flat, no old woman on a bus with an explanation from 1994, and because for a long time I genuinely believed it was the least frightening thing that had ever happened to me, right up until I said the whole of it out loud to another person and watched their face and understood from their face what I had actually been describing for 11 minutes. I was 28 and working the close at a restaurant that let out somewhere between midnight and 1, and I walked home because it was a small enough city to walk, and because I liked the 25 minutes of nobody wanting anything from me, And after the first month, I did a thing that I want you to notice is not the behavior of somebody being followed. I started varying my route, not out of fear, out of boredom. There were roughly 5 ways home from that restaurant. And over 2 years, I took all of them in no order at all. Genuinely no order. Because I chose at the first junction based on nothing. On which side of the street I happened to be walking, on whether I wanted to pass the all-night bakery or not. And I don't remember when I started noticing it, which is itself part of the problem. But by the second winter, I had a private, embarrassing, entirely unspoken habit of checking. Because whichever way I chose, at some point on that route, there was a man standing still. Not walking behind me. I want to be precise because this is the whole of it. Never behind me. Always ahead, always already stopped. Always on the pavement I was going to be on, 3 or 4 minutes before I got there. In a doorway on the short route. By the shuttered chemist on the route past the bakery. At the mouth of the alley, on the long way round by the church. Different places. Same standing. I never got a face. I want to be honest about that, because if I told you I'd seen a face, this would be a different and much less troubling story. He was always at the distance where a person is a shape, a coat, a stillness, an angle of the head that might have been towards me and might have been at nothing. And by the time I was close enough to resolve any of it, he had always gone, and gone quietly, into a side street or a doorway, or simply out of the frame of my attention, the way you lose track of a stranger 100 times a day without it meaning anything. I never once felt threatened. Nothing was ever said. Nobody ever came near me. And so for 2 years, I filed the whole thing under the enormous, forgiving heading of cities are full of people standing about. And I finished that job, and I moved away, and I did not think about it properly again for 9 years. There is one night I left out of the version I used to tell at tables, and I left it out because it's the one that doesn't work as atmosphere. It was February of the second winter, and I got to the first junction. And I did something I'd never done, which is that I stood there. Not for a reason. I'd got a text and I stopped to answer it. And it took me 4 or 5 minutes, standing under the light outside the closed newsagent, and then I put my phone away and I went right, past the church, the long way. And about 6 minutes later, at the mouth of the alley where the long way narrows, he was there, standing. Already stopped. And the thing I did not let myself think for 9 years, the thing my brain slid off the way it slides off a bad shape in a dark room, is that for those 4 or 5 minutes, I had been standing in the open, alone, at a lit junction, and there had been nobody there. Nobody ahead of me on either road, nobody behind. I would have seen a person walk past me and go right. I'd have seen them from 30 meters. Whatever was at that alley 6 minutes later had not overtaken me while I stood under that light, and had not been on the road I chose before I chose it, and I have no third option to offer you. I went home, and I locked the door, and I made a cup of tea, and I watched something on my laptop until I fell asleep. And in the morning I told myself, I'd probably just missed him. That sentence, I'd probably just missed him, is the single most useful thing I have ever learned about myself. What broke it open was telling it at a table as a nothing story, a bit of atmosphere. And a friend of mine who is a very literal-minded woman stopped me halfway and asked how I'd chosen my route. I said I hadn't. I said that was the point of it, that I'd picked at random at the junction, that some nights I'd changed my mind halfway and doubled back. And she asked the question that I have not been able to put down since, in the mild tone of somebody clearing up a detail. Then how was he always ahead of you? And I said what I'd been telling myself for a decade, without ever once examining it, which is that he must have been walking the streets. And I kept crossing his path, and she said, 5 routes, 2 years, and you crossed his path every single night, always in front, never behind, and never on a night you didn't work. 9 years I'd carried that. 11 minutes. It took somebody else to see the shape of it, because being followed means somebody is behind you, working out where you're going. And whatever that was, for 2 years, it was never behind me. It was already there. Which means it wasn't following my route at all. It was waiting on it, in the right place, before I had chosen. 6 people. One had a number next to her name on a stranger's phone. One had her week learned by something that had been riding the same late bus since before she was born. One was assembled out of his own boring post by a man who had helped him carry a mattress up the stairs. One was rebuilt out of 9 years of other people's memories by a polite voice on a telephone. One bought 300 meters of open ground and watched something stand at the end of it for 4 years. And one chose a different way home every night for 2 years and never once got there first. If you made it all the way to the end of this one, then you're awake at the hour these stories do their work, and so am I. So tell me down in the comments, have you ever had the specific feeling that somebody knew your week? Not that you were being watched, that you were being timed. And if something happened to you, on a walk, on a shift, at a door, in the small hours when you thought you were the only one keeping track, I want to hear it. Because we read every story that finds us, and the next voice on this channel might be yours. The pinned comment up top shows you exactly how. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and I'll see you again at 3 a.m. Sleep well tonight. And if you ever do notice the same face twice in 1 week in a city of 1 million people, don't tell yourself what a coincidence that is. Ask yourself how many times it happened before you started counting.